Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for March 14th, 2025. It's Pi Day. I'm Benji Fisher, sharing my screen and moderating, and also here are Ralph Kohler and Simo Hell. I guess the reason it's called Pi Day is sort of US-centric because we usually write month and then day. So the month is 3 and the day is 14. 3, 14 are the first few digits of pi. But I guess again, that's US-centric because most people don't write month and then day. But anyway, let's see, also present are Ralph Kohler and Simo Hell, and Thomas Howell just joined us. And we've been discussing this issue for a while. There are just a couple of more things I'd like to talk about. The issue is refine the field descriptions, and the issue number is, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. The issue number is 3370326. And let me just do something off screen. Post this link in the chat. That's the test Drupal site I have set up. You can log in as admin/admin. I am, by the way, running this meeting from Drupal Camp, New Jersey, and on the campus of Princeton University. And for the sake of the recording, I know this is familiar to all of us on the meeting. My Zoom windows are getting in the way. There we go. Some windows are still getting in the way. I want to manage fields and create a new field. And let's do reference because that's the worst. And it's mostly the text on these pages. We're choosing a particular type of field that we've been discussing. So yes, there are 2 points left over that I'd like to discuss, and this is the first one. So what text, if any, should we have as these descriptions? Currently it says an entity field containing an entity reference, and that's repeated 3 times. Should we have something else there? Should we just remove it? What should we do there? Go ahead, Thomas.
So, where it says choose an option below, couldn't we simply change the wording to choose an entity field option below or something like that?
I guess entity type would be technically correct.
Sure. I'm just thinking that because I know before we'd been concerned about adding lots of extra text, but if we were repurposing the already existing text, that might be a way to accommodate that aspect of keeping key language while at the same time getting rid of the repetition.
Okay. Go ahead, Ralph.
Haven't we had a draft for those options as well already? Because if you take a look at the Google Sheet and scroll down to reference, then you'll notice content, and we have link content such as basic page article, examples, related articles, next, previous links in step 2.
While you're scrolling, I might bring up, there was related also to, it's what wasn't on the entity reference, but on another issue, there was a comment which had a minor note from Gabor that he was thinking about choose type of field label looking very odd.
This issue? Simo, is this the issue you're talking about? You said there was.
No, it was on a different issue, but it had come up.
It's the
That's
modal issue you refer to.
Yeah. So there was a just as a minor note about those labels.
I have the
So that's something that
link.
could come up in other cases as well.
One sec, I have the link. Got it. I already have it, sorry. Haven't seen while searching.
So for the sake of the recording, this is issue 338-6762. And the comment is here. Is it this paragraph down here?
Yeah.
Choose a type of field label looks very odd. It is tiny compared to the massive selection options under it. You do realize this is the standard label size. The whole dialog does not look like a form. It does not even have a button, so the red asterisk feels out of place. Also, this label does not add anything to the dialog. We already know we are adding the field. I don't think the label clarifies anything about the selection below. Either way, I don't think it's worth debating. This is part not holding up anything. Talks about the responsive behavior. So I guess is this the text he's talking about? Choose an option below.
Yeah, in it was a different version, so it was a choosing type of field.
Right. So the text has already changed. Okay, so I guess Ralph points out we've already discussed this, and we suggested using a different text for each entity type, with examples of for the three that we list separately for content or nodes, for taxonomy terms, and for users. And some examples of why you would want to use them. So shall we stick with that? I did look into this several weeks ago, and current merge request supports customizing the text in these fields. So shall we stick with what we have here? Get a thumbs up from Ralph. And from Simo.
Yeah, I think it's good to have, because content and taxonomy term, they are something like it's kind of a confusing until we can kind of sort out all the Drupalisms and how people understand it. And then any is something that, because any includes, like other includes the ones that are listed as separate, so then it makes sense to use any instead of other.
Okay. Ralph?
Just one further remark. I would suggest in a follow-up, when we deal with the problem of media and image and where it's placed, I still like Aaron's idea with providing in the second step in the choosing the options, the media on 2 occasions for references as well as for the assets or images or however that group will be called. But that would be an easy workaround from my perspective and a reasonable way to have that sort of redundancy, because media is, for one, could be found under images or media related groups as well as references. So, but yeah, out of scope for this issue.
Yeah. And as long as we're talking about things that are out of scope. The next step here, you have to choose from this select list. And that's just a terrible user interface for such a long list. And when you have contrib modules adding additional options to this list, it becomes even more unmanageable. So wouldn't it make sense to list all the possibilities on this page where you can easily scroll and read them, rather than force people to choose from a select list on the next page? But not as part of this issue. It's something to keep in mind.
I think looking at what the decision was with numbers excluding float, I think adding everything, like adding versioning, like content versions here, it would be very confusing for a beginner user to have content or content versions, choosing between those, and then taxonomy term versions and all different kind of versions that can be referenced, for instance.
Okay, so you think some of those, there are too many options there and it's too confusing and we just shouldn't present it on the main page?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. There's something else I suggested 2 weeks ago, and this is for the date time. So let's go back to this and choose date time. And we were talking about the text to distinguish between a date and a timestamp, and also if you enable the date time range module, there's a third option. Some contrib modules add additional options. And I guess we have it over here. So these, both date and time, are required. What I suggested in Slack was something like required parts, date, comma, time. So let me type in a different box. So required parts, date, time. So that was my suggestion as an alternative to both date and time are required. So do people like that suggestion? I'm not seeing any opinions pro or con. If you're speaking, then you forgot to unmute yourself. Go ahead, Ralph.
Just one question rather. For me, as a non-native speaker, requires parts
Oh, I'm
reads
sorry.
ought. Is it required parts?
Yes, that was just a typo. You know,
Oh,
the
okay.
S and the D are right next to each other on the keyboard.
I think it's a little bit confusing. Required parts, date and time, and our example is just a very large integer. So that's a little bit confusing. So I think, but that also is the same thing with both date and time are required. So I think it might be clear, better, easier to understand if we said, like mentioned that input requires parts, or because looking at next to example, it's kind of very confusing to me.
Something like this.
Or can you choose just a timestamp just to input integer? Is that something, a widget that comes with the core?
I don't believe so.
Yeah. Yeah, input requires. I think that's because then it's a little bit easier to relate to that example.
And I guess this puts the distinguishing things at the end. Currently, we have both date and time are required. Date and time are in the middle. And as we know, the best place to put it is at the start, and second best places to put it is at the end. And in the middle is sort of the worst if you're trying to distinguish between possibilities. So I'm happy to take Simo's suggestion. Other opinions? Go ahead.
If we change to input requires date time, then to make it unified for the date time or the date at the beginning. At the moment we have for date time we have date is required, time is optional, simply input requires and then just date without time.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay. Then
And I think between just the name, date, time, and the example, it's pretty clear that that you are allowed to put it in time. It's just not required.
yeah. But it's good to make it for one consistent and on the other hand also explicit.
It's a little bit longer, but we could also put the word require first. Would that be any clearer?
Or how about required input without the for?
I don't feel strongly about either of these, but happy to go with Simo's suggestion.
I also have no strong opinion.
Let's go with this one. Oops, go up, not down. I'm using my laptop today, so the keyboard is a little bit cramped. And then for the date time range, we don't need that differentiator because we are describing it as two different date time elements. So we already know that the date time requires a date. Okay. I'm willing to consider this issue done for now. All we have to do now is fill in the decisions we've made. And I know that Ralph, you've already started that.
If you could rebase the merge request, then I can fill in the rest.
Sure, I will do that within the next 24 hours.
Yeah, no rush, but it's out of my ability,
Okay,
the errors there, but there with those changes in regards of the float, it's definitely necessary for a rebase.
okay.
And just one question, something I've raised in the UX channel about selection lists with the float number type gone. That is fine, but in the context of select lists, it's still in selection lists, it still feels odd because now you only have the text selection list and the integer selection list, but you're unable to have a float or decimal based selection list anymore. And that is quite odd.
Well, we've already discussed that. Do you want to?
We have only discussed the number, but the selection itself, that it's gone, we haven't touched, if I remember correctly.
Oh, I think we were discussing having some text above the list of options. Is that what you mean?
It's more like now about the missing ability to have a list with comma separator as a floating point numbers or decimal numbers or however you want to call them. It's more of a lack of a feature here. Because for numbers, you still have the decimal available. And therefore, that way you are able to have a floating numbers, but with selection lists, it's a different story. That is my problem.
Well, I'm not sure what you're suggesting. Do you want to,
I'm not sure.
argue to bring it back, or?
I'm not sure how to handle it because for numbers, I understand having decimal and float alongside is confusing. And therefore removing floats there is is okay. But on here with the selection list, if someone wants floating point numbers or numbers that are not integer numbers,
Well, they could use strings to represent floating point numbers. And did we finally decide to use that as one of our examples?
No, the examples here are fruits.
Yeah, we tested that it works, but then
we could add a second example. Just 0.9 half 0.5 some 0.3. Let me see if I can make that the same size. Would you like to do that? Okay, Ralph is giving a thumbs up. Anyone object? I'm just playing with the spreadsheet, trying to get this to wrap properly.
1 second, I do it.
Go into the format menu. Thank you.
Yeah, under format, and then wrapping, and then wrap.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe I was a little bit rushed earlier. Are there any other things people would like to revisit on this issue? And I will rebase the merge request, and Ralph will continue working on it. Great. Yeah, go ahead, Ralph.
How about the following? After rebase and after I fill in our conclusions and the draft, how about revisit it with a fresh eye in context next week or the week after, and have a final discussion, and then set the issue to review, so others can take a look and provide feedback. And we don't have to spend the entire hour, but to have a last look in context in the interface with all those changes in might be a good thing from my perspective.
Okay, I would say that we should set it to needs review first. And other people as well as us can have a chance to review it at that point.
Okay.
Okay. So we are halfway through the hour. Ralph, I know you revived an old thread in Slack about time zones, which is sort of a good time of year to be thinking about time zones, as the US has already switched over to daylight savings time, but most of Europe has not yet. Is that right?
At the end of March, we will
Okay.
change.
So do you want to bring that issue up again, or is there a different issue people would like to talk about?
I would just have the one question in the context of the thread I've raised. It's basically about 1 sec. There's the link.
Okay. Thanks for joining, Thomas.
In November, we've discussed the following issue It is issue number 3169876, better handling of time zones for relative default date and times. From our review back then, there was not really any change made from our suggestions yet, and it was asked that we create follow-up issues, and I'm in the process of doing so. And while writing those up, so far I've only set up one issue, which is basically the following: 3512375, make the relative default value validation more forgiving towards deviating time zone notations, with the problem of form validation errors and so forth. But my question, and the other, basically I wanted to create two follow-up issues. That one I've linked, and the other about make it more explicit in the interface on the field settings page, as well as on the node edit form, in which time zone a user is who is entering. But while writing that up and revisiting everything, I wondered about the following, if it would make sense, because back then we have taken a look at the string to time PHP function.
Actually, Ralph,
Yep.
let me interrupt you. And you've thought about this recently, and the rest of us
Sorry.
haven't. So
I was too fast. Sorry.
so walk me through. I guess
Yeah.
if I just add a date time field,
Mm-hmm.
so maybe I was already on the right page.
And date and time. Go back button. And go to date and time.
Right, it's obscured by the Zoom windows, which is why I
Oh,
made that
okay.
mistake.
Then
And
pick date and add a label. Continue. And scroll down, please. And set default value. And select default date relative. And there you're able, at the moment you see here, describe tape by reference, describe a time by reference to the current day, like plus 90 days. And see string to time for more details. And in that field, relative field, in our test back then, we said plus 3 days. Where is it?
oh, look, my browser remembers all the things I entered here.
Scroll down and go to the gist. Yeah, exactly. The +2 Friday, 12 p.m. and then the time zone. That field is stored in the config table, and there the time zone is stored as well. But if you now save the setting, and if you create a node,
And this is basic page.
yeah, and
So just save with the default
yeah,
value.
just the default is fine. Because if you go then into the database and take a look at the field, in that field, the time zone isn't stored.
That's right.
And And the point is the following. In our recommendation back then, we've said adding a note that is to the field settings page with the relative date. That is because per default, there's no sign that there is any time zone set, but it is using basically UTC there. And our recommendation was simply there in the description, add a remark about time zones, same as in some way on the node edit form, leave a note which is the actual time zone applied there in either the description or in the form itself. That was still open for discussion, but at least make it explicit in the interface to the user. But then while getting up to speed there and taking a look at the field in the database, and due to the fact that there is no time zone mentioned in any way there, I wonder if it would make sense, and that is circling back to the string to time function. If you take a look there in the warning, there's on the PHP page I've posted, there's the warning, the Unix timestamp that this function returns does not contain information about time zones. In order to do calculations with date and time information, you should use the more capable date time immutable. And I wonder if it would make sense to create a third follow-up issue and switch from string to time to that date time immutable, and change not only for that relative date time field to the date time immutable, but also for the field on the form, so that basically you have a date time object that contains also the time zone explicitly. At the moment, it is not there, and I imagine it's not very robust that way, and also
Okay.
confusing.
So first of all, I did a quick database query in a window that I'm not sharing, and this is the value that got
Yep.
stored.
Yep.
I guess I never added the date time field to the display, but it is a date in year, month, day format, capital letter T, and then a time. And as Ralph says, there's no time zone information. So that agrees with the help text we're proposing. So for date time, this example is accurate.
Yeah.
Now, so the issue you brought up again, better handling of time zones, is talking about just the default value for the configuration. And you're now talking about the value that's actually stored in the database, and whether or not just the configuration form, but also what gets stored in the database should be changed. So that's a very different question. Now let's open up the PHP page that Ralph mentions. Again, I'm still juggling the Zoom windows that you don't see.
Yeah,
So
there is the
somewhere,
warning.
did I scroll past it already?
Yeah.
So this advice is sort of when you're dealing with date time objects in PHP code, Now, when you're storing them in the database, you have sort of a different set of questions and optimizations to make. So we could handle it in the PHP code with a different class. We could use datetime immutable. But I'm not sure what we would then be storing in the database. We probably would not want to be storing a serialized datetime immutable object. We need some sort of compact string representation for performance reasons. So I don't understand all the details well enough to make a recommendation. There might be a good solution that would also store time zone information, and it might be based on the date time immutable. But if I were creating the issue, I would phrase it as, consider using this, not we should use this.
No, but my question was rather, should a third issue be created? That is more of the question. Not necessarily only about that relative date time field, but broader scope for the date time field itself, because there is no time zone at all. And I imagine it confusing and not explicit. And in particular, and it's simply to wrap my head around. It was quite puzzling, let's put it that way. And yeah, I'm not sure if it's necessary or not.
Also, we've mentioned the contrib module that adds additional date-like fields. That might already do something like what you're suggesting.
Which module we refer to, the smart date field?
Is that the name date field? Is there not a field type?
Is it the date field? Is it the date module?
This package contains both a flexible date time field and a date API. Well, that was for Drupal 7. It doesn't have any current releases.
Oh, okay.
So it works with Drupal 10, say. Smart date, date pop-up, date iCal, date all day, recurring dates, date augmenter. So maybe smart date, more user-friendly date field, upgrading the functionality for this might be it. And zero duration, formatting, performance. Dates are stored as timestamps. So that, but anyway, whether or not there's already a contrib module that does it, it would be a lot of work to change the way the core date time module stores its data, right? Every site that has date information stored in the database would need to update that. So, a new date-like field could be created in a contrib module or in core. And I'd rather have it as a new option rather than change the way the current datetime field works. And you'd have to think about whether it's actually improving performance, whether it's actually improving usability. So it's not something that I would spend a lot of time on unless I had a project where I was running into actual problems.
Yeah, then I'll just create the second, just the front facing in the user interface follow-up issue, and leave the suggestion for the field itself out.
Okay.
Just wanted to make sure. But it was just, it looked confusing because if you take a look at the stored values in fields on nodes, with no sign of any time zone, and then having that where that information then comes from in the interface, that is the question I wonder about.
So of course, if you're storing the time zone information, then anytime you work with the date, you have to do additional work to handle that time zone. It's really when entering the date and displaying the date that you need to do that work. And it just seems to me simpler to follow that strategy, that input and display pay attention to a time zone, and everything else just works with either a timestamp, a number of seconds since 1970, or else a string like this. You also have to consider the database support. So it's not just a question of whether PHP can handle it, but whether the database supports it. And just think about sorting. We want the database to do the sorting because databases are efficient at doing that. And if the database doesn't know how to sort dates with time zone information added, then it's a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah, but for example, what is the case if you enter an event at a certain time in a certain time zone, and then at a later point the time zone changes and the time the event takes place and it gets updated?
So are you thinking of a recurring event?
Yeah.
Yeah, recurring events are especially hard. And one strategy is to handle a recurring event by creating a bunch of individual events. I think that's the way Smart Date does things. There might even be a separate entity that they create that just holds limited information. These are not easy questions, but I just don't think that storing time zone information in the database is the right way to handle them.
Yeah, then I'll create a follow-up just about the proposed changes for the interface, and maybe leave a question on the issue then, and asking if it would work, or if it at a later point would be reasonable to add that, or necessary to add it to the database as well, the time zone information, or if it's already possible in the way it's currently set up.
Okay.
Just as a question to people who are more familiar with the problem space.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a little more than 5 minutes left. Is there anything else you'd like to bring up?
I have one issue that's actually part of Smart Date, but also a general one, but maybe we don't have time for that now.
Oh, yes, you did say a few weeks ago there was an issue you wanted to bring up, but you've never actually brought it up in the meeting. Yeah, and five minutes isn't really enough to start discussing a new thing. Okay, well, as I said earlier, I am at a Drupal camp. So I would appreciate the extra 5 minutes to get to a different room for one of the sessions. So let's call it a day. Thank you for participating, and we'll talk again next week.
Thank you. Enjoy the camp.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.